so many phone calls and so many. I've told y'all that I've done more counseling in the last year than I've done in the previous 27. And the counseling is not what you generally think of, marriages falling apart or things like that, or trouble with children. It's people struggling with their own faith, struggling with their own, how to respond to the things that are in the world, how to handle their own anger, how to respond to the people who are out there, and then who are just worried. Just about anybody that's got a child, military service age, has talked to me in some way in the last little bit. And so that has been churning through my mind really the whole year. And as Roy was praying this morning, I just decided I'm going to try to talk through something this morning. I've been telling you, and I absolutely believe this, that I really believe a pivotal time in our history is coming. Soon or middle soon or late soon, I don't know, right? But when Satan is most active is when things are most chaotic, and chaos by nature cannot remain. Because it has no order, it cannot stand. And if you look throughout history in times of great trial and struggle, and I'm not just talking about America, I'm talking about around the world. When you look at history in times of great struggle or times of great difficulty or times of great uncertainty, following those times, one of two things generally takes place. Revival or revolution. And what really determines whether revival or revolution will take place is the preparedness and the courage of the church. Whether we are ready, as Paul says, to give an answer for the hope that is in you. You read Peter as he is talking to people who have been cast out of their land because of their religion. They could not be in the land of their fathers or their forefathers any longer. And he writes to them and tells them, you be ready. Know how to speak and what to speak to those around you and anticipate a mighty working of God. John, in his little letters, writing to those same people, now not in his gospel, but in his epistles, tells them that during this time, love one another. And serve one another, and love one another, and love one another, and don't let little things irk you to the point that you get upset or you get down or you get into despair or what we would say pessimistic today. But to keep our eye, as it were, on the prize, to love God, to love one another, and to fellowship together one with another, that the joy of Christ might be in you. And so with that in mind, whether I'm right or not about revolution and revival, this is what the church should be at all times anyway, right? Ready to give an answer. All ministers, right, working together for the good of God, the welfare of one another, right, and to be a light shining in the darkness. And so I want us to return to John. We stopped our study of John to do this little thing on Esther and the prodigal son. But I want us to go back and look at John chapter 3. John chapter number 3. Oh, I don't see anyone new here today, but y'all know my thing. I'm just going to have to do this the best I can without seeing. If I'm way off, Jeff will stop me and say what's correct. Right? I do not want to misrepresent the Word of God. Right? Now, there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. And this man came to Jesus by night and said to him, Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher come from God, for no one can do the things that you do unless God is with him. And then Jesus answered him and said, Truly, truly, I say to you, unless one is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Nicodemus said to him, How can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter a second time into his mother's womb and be born? And Jesus says, Truly, 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 I say to you, unless one is born of water and spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. I really believe a lot of the division that we are seeing in our world, in our country, and in our own relationships with our families, with our friends, with our co-workers. I think a lot of the division that is going on is because modern man, modern philosophy, and I don't care if you're reading from Boston University or Oxford in England, or you're reading in the University of Calcutta or wherever. There are two fallacies that man has adopted in this age. Two fallacious philosophies by which so many people have ordered their life, and it's causing division. It is causing rancor. It is causing the light of Christ to be covered by our own opinion or by our own emotions. We are, in a very real way, weaving a basket to cover our light. And those two fallacious philosophies are this. One is, if I reject your philosophy of life, if I reject what you believe, your philosophy of life, then I hate you. That's not true at all. Right? I don't agree with Robbie Bull shopping in the boys section. Sorry, Robbie, but Charles is not here. No, just because I disagree with your philosophy of life, or even some of the things that you hold dear, that does not mean that I hate you. It does not mean even that I dislike you. And if I say something about it, it is in love, I promise. But you see, that's the first logical fallacy that we have accepted. If I disagree with you on something, then necessarily I hate you. That is not true. And by the way, it cannot be true amongst Christians. It might be true of others, but it cannot be true of those of us who bear the name of Christ. Because God disagreed with everything we were doing and came in love to redeem us. The second logical fallacy is, if I love you, then I have to accept your philosophy of life as true. No. I can love you and not like what you do. I can love you and not like how you are living. In fact, I have to disagree with those things that are damaging or damning in your life if I love you. Just because I love you doesn't mean that if I see you heating up, your drugs in the spoon, then I'm not going to say, hey, smack the heroin out of your hand. Right? You see, we have these two logical fallacies. That if I disagree with you, I hate you. But if I love you, I have to agree with you. Those are not true, right? And that is why discourse in the modern day is so very difficult. It's all debate. It's all argument. It's all gotcha this, gotcha that, statements and quotes, right? rather than true discourse, true communication. And if you look in the scriptures, you see a lot of confrontation with Jesus and the Pharisees. But most of what he did, and then especially in Acts following that, was simply to have discourse, to have conversations, gospel conversations about God, about life, about where things are going. But discourse has become so difficult in our day. Another reason why discourse, why conversation is so difficult, is because you have, especially between Christians and non-Christians, trying to bring to conversion the non-Christian, in trying to evangelize. You have a difficulty in discourse there because you have the sighted trying to speak to the blind. And that's a difficult thing. Try to describe the color purple to somebody who's never seen. Oh, you might could describe a tree because they could go up there and feel it, right? But try to describe the color purple or the beauty of a sunset, right? Or the wondrous power of a deer running through the woods and jumping a 6-rail fence. It's almost impossible. But here's one of the coolest things about the scriptures, is that we who are sighted, who have been given vision and understanding by God, by the mere act of having a gospel conversation, the act of conversing about the things of God, causes those who are blind to be able to see. Because it is by faith that we see. It is by truth that gives us vision. And they can begin to see. By speaking truth, the blind can begin to see. You see that in this conversation with Nicodemus, right? Nicodemus is the teacher of Israel. He has all the position. He has all of the clout. He has done all the work behind him. And I am sure not every single Pharisee was horrible. In fact, Nicodemus and a few others tried to stop what the mass of the Pharisees were doing. But Nicodemus had spent his life studying God, had spent his life trying to serve God and people. But he was completely stone blind as to who God was and what God desired. Because he was following philosophies of men rather than God. He had given himself over to religion rather than to relationship. And so Jesus says to him, "You must be born again." And Nicodemus tries to change the subject. How can a man be born again when he is old? Can he enter a second time into his mother's womb? And then he tries to change the subject again whenever he's talking about, what we have determined, what we have seen. And then he finally tells Jesus, "How can these things be?" And Jesus answered, "Are you the teacher of Israel, and yet you don't know these things?" First, he tries to change the subject. And here's that part that makes me just want to change the sermon, to go away from Esther. And I really wanted to do all of those glorious things that you see in Esther this morning. But I think this is more important. The devil and the system that he has built up will do anything that he can do to get we who are Christians off task. He'll do anything that he can do to cloud the situation, to stop a conversation, but to even stop us from loving and caring and serving, so that eyes might be prepared to see, that they may have eyes to see and ears to hear. The devil will do anything to get us off of task, to take our eyes off of the place where they should belong. We spend more of our time worrying about needles, masks, and policies, who drives a Ford and who drives a Chevy. We spend more of our time on that. And those type things so consume us that our focus then becomes on the outside of men rather than on the inside of men. We are only looking at the surface rather than seeing through the surface to men who are trapped, to men who are ensnared, to men and women who are confused by the devil, to men and women who have accepted the lie as the truth without knowing it. You see, we get so concerned with the outside. Well, he's got tattoos, he's got a ponytail, he's bald. You know, we get so worried about those things that we only see the outside and not the inside. And when Jesus comes along and says you must be born again, we're as confused as Nicodemus. How can a man, the mighty shrinking Pharisee, we must learn to move beyond those things, to see a world in chaos. And if it's in chaos, it's hurting. And God provides rest. Rest for the weary and rest for the wicked. Rest for any who would call out on his name. Listen, it is people that we should be concerned about. We get these things mixed up. Now listen, I know policy and sicknesses and all of that matters. I know it does. But it should be people first, people second, people third, then pandemic and policy and philosophy and all of that. Our concern when we look at people is not someone who is the enemy first. Now, there's a time for rebuke and correction and all of those things. Y'all understand what I'm saying? I'm not saying universalism, anything goes, right? But what I'm saying is that when we look at these people who are caught up in the chaos and the difficulty of the world, we need to see the person first. The chaos, the corruption that has brought them to the place where they are. I can't tell you how heartrending it is to find a 13-year-old girl across the desk in your office while a mother is crying uncontrollably because she doesn't know if she is a girl or a boy or a dolphin or even a person. That totally confused. It's heartrending. And you see, sometimes we see that we want to speak more to the outside than see the entrapped person on the inside. This was Nicodemus. Now, he was blinded by his education. He was blinded by his work. He was blinded by so many other things. It's heartrending to have a 9-year-old across your desk talking about having sex. It's heartrending. But it's people who have been ensnared, people who have been entrapped. And Christ is saying, listen, I will set men free. And I have no idea why he would use us as his instruments to do that, but he does. Think of how big of a chance that is. That God has left to us to tell his story. But you see, he knows the power of redemption. He knows the power of transformation. And so it's not a chance. He's not taking a chance by leaving it to us. He is changing us to where we can do it. So we have to get past first those two fallacies. And then you see here, Nicodemus makes two mistakes that we can't afford to make. He calls him teacher. Rabbi, we know that you are one come from God, and yet doesn't listen to what he says. He calls him teacher, but he never becomes a disciple. He honors him with the honorific teacher, but he doesn't listen. He doesn't learn, right? And then he recognizes, the second mistake is he doesn't recognize that God is right there in front of him to help him understand those things that he cannot understand. And he says God is with you, with Jesus, rather than recognizing that God is right there to help him. And those are two mistakes that we can't make. To call Jesus teacher and yet not listen and learn. I'm going to ask one of those questions again that I want to see hands. I don't want to see any hands. How much have you tried to learn about God this week? How much time have you spent just getting to know him more? I can tell you, the more you do that, the less your anxiety will be, right? It's just like we sang there in that last song, that we will know that our foundation is firm in his word, in his death, and then in his life for us. We will know that he is in control. You see, Nicodemus's failure was not in what he believed before. He's trapped. He's ensnared. And he doesn't know it. Nicodemus's fault comes when he calls Jesus teacher but won't listen. And then doesn't recognize the God who is in front of him. Listen, we need as Christians to recognize the power of God. I think sometimes you say, Bill, we do. Sometimes we don't, right? Because we'll read how God says to handle a certain situation and we'll say what? That really won't work. He spoke when people wore sandals. I got on cowboy boots. It was a different time back then. We don't really see the power of God. I want you to go back to Genesis chapter 4. I have no idea why I'm turning. I can't see it at all, but we'll try. Genesis chapter 4. Yeah, I can't see that at all. Adam and Eve conceived a son. His name was Cain, right? I have gotten man with the help of the Lord, which is what Cain means. I have begotten a man with the help of the Lord. Is that all right? Close enough? I have begotten a man with the help of the Lord, and that's who Cain was. And then then Abel comes along, and God calls Cain and Abel to gather and to bring sacrifice. And you see, God had done this beautifully. One of them's a farmer, and one of them's a shepherd. And he made it to where when they came together, they could share what one another needed. Cain would need meat and leather and wool and all of those things. And Abel would need what? Anything but green beans. I mean, the pinto beans. Right? He would need fruits and vegetables. But Cain, when he comes, doesn't want to have to do what God had called him to do. And so it says in verse 5, God had no regard for Cain and his offering because Cain wanted to do it his own way. And so Cain became very angry and killed his brother. And then when God asked him where his brother was, he says, am I my brother's keeper? Now Cain's name means from the help of God. I have begotten man with the help of God. And yet, he won't help. You got the curse in chapter 3, and then the very first act of man after the fall was fratricide. One brother killing another. Because of the curse. Because of the absence of God. Because he had stepped away. Now, you say, Bill, I thought we were talking about the power of God. We are. Hang on a minute. I've used this illustration before, but I'm going to use it again. The earth has been cursed I don't know how many thousands of years. And a strawberry still tastes good. A peach, a good, juicy, ripe peach, there's not much better. Watermelon is still sweet. It's been cursed for thousands of years, and yet God created it with his power, and the curse, after all of those many years, has not yet taken the full flavor away from a strawberry, or the full sweetness away from a peach. That's amazing. That's power. And if we look at this, this is the first act outside of the garden. It's amazing that we have any kind of order or society now at all. When you think about that God said, I'm going to give them up, I'm going to give them up, I'm going to give them over to a reprobate mind. He cast them out of the Garden of Eden. He cast them out of his presence. The fact that we have any kind of order, any kind of society, any kind of community now at all is amazing. Because human beings are selfish by nature. Any of you had children? Any of you had multiple children at the same time? Are they selfish by nature? Yes. But God's common grace, just his common grace, is so powerful. He says in Matthew 5, he causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. He says in Acts chapter 11 that the rains of heaven bring about fruitful seasons even for the wicked. Luke says that, Luke 6 says that Luke 6 says that he is kind and grateful even to the evil. It's amazing. Just the power of God's common grace. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, God talks about the primary purpose of his common grace is to restrain sin. God who now restrains the wicked. He doesn't fully stop it, but he restrains it. And then he gave us things like family and government and things like that to restrain the full expression of selfish man. And it is an amazing commentary on the power of God that his common grace has led us from Cain and Abel to what we see today. It's amazing that we're not just survival of the fittest. And you know what? Roy's got a new truck. And I'm bigger than Roy. I'm faster than Roy. And if I wasn't a preacher, I could say I could shoot straighter than Roy. I guess a preacher ought not talk about murdering his people. Might be the only pastor in the country who did that this year. But without God, without that restraining force, see, that's one of those things that I just don't understand about those who only have an evolutionary way of thinking without having a theistic way of thinking also, right? To think that we would share with the weak and the weary, and that we wouldn't just try to get all that we could while we were young and then have enough to defend us, have enough to buy our defense when we're old. It makes no philosophical sense apart from the common grace that God gives. He says in 1 Peter that his kindness, his common grace, is given to lead men to repentance. And so we have to remember and respect the power of God, to recognize the power of God. Now we bemoan, and rightly. Don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying Christians can't complain or Christians can't be angry. Okay? We bemoan, rightly, the chaos and the darkness in this world. But we ought to also sit back and be amazed that it's not worse. That the power of God's common grace can do that much. And we are not merely the recipients of God's common grace, we're the recipients of his specific or his personal grace. I want to show you how powerful God is. Romans 8. We know that God works all things together for good to those who love him, to the called according to his purpose. What verse is that? 28. We know these things. That's amazing enough to know that God can do that. But keep reading, right? For those whom he foreknew, he also predestinated to be conformed to the image of his Son. Now that's some power right there. You want to talk about power? Oh yeah, I mean, there's power in the fact that after 10,000, 12,000 years of a curse, a strawberry still tastes good. Absolutely. There's power there. There's power in the fact that we can have community, that we can have some semblance of understanding amongst ourselves, that we can have some kind of law and order and idea of nationhood and even benevolence man to man. But the real power, this is the power of God. I can take Bill Vest, a doofus from Lenore City, who had a temper beyond anything, who used to fight, just mean, and make him like me. I can make him like Christ. I can turn him into one who not only has a job to care for people, but absolutely loves it. You can't imagine doing anything else. You want to know the power of God? He can take Roy Grimes and take him and mold him and make him into an image of his Son. He can do it with Wilma Davis. He can do it with Saul of Tarsus. That's some power right there, folks. And we need to understand just how powerful God is. We bemoan, and we bemoan rightly, the chaos in the world. But let me tell you, the chaos in the world is nothing compared to the power of God. It's nothing compared to the power of God. When you woke up this morning, God knew how many hairs were on your head. And for those people who in Afghanistan or in the Philippines or in Uganda who lose their heads today, He knows how many hairs are on theirs. And for those Christians who are beheaded today because of their faith, before those noble heads hit the dirt, He will have taken them and glorified them. Listen to the rest of the verse. Whom He predestinated, He also conformed to the image of His Son, that He might be the firstborn among many brethren. And those He predestinated, them He called. And then He called, He also justified. And then He justified, He also what? Glorified. That's the power of God. That He can, in the midst of chaos, use me to bring glory. We are the recipients, not just of God's common grace, but of His specific and transforming grace. We are not to be like Nicodemus and in our pride want to argue with God. We are to humble ourselves before God and say, here I am. You've gifted me, now train me. And use me. And again, like I said before, in humility, to see that men are ensnared, trapped, dark, in darkness. I thought of it and I wrote down this little thought while we were singing. You know what we're to be really as Christians? Anti-Satan. I've heard a whole lot here lately about the Antichrist. Man, I can't tell you how many questions I've had on the Antichrist. I'll have to deal with that here in a couple of months after I get my head around all of it, right? Make sure I've got it, by the truth rather than by emotion. But I thought of this, and weirdly, while Roy was preaching, I thought, okay, here's what we should be as Christians. Not while Roy was preaching. Praying. Here's what we should be as Christians. While we've talked a whole lot about the Antichrist, we ought to be the anti-Satan. He subtly, by just simply carrying on conversations with Adam and Eve, and then finally seeing that he could get his hooks in them, right? Led them from light to darkness. You know what we should do? Live our lives to help men be translated from darkness to what? To light. Let's be anti-Satan. Right? We are the recipients of the specific transforming grace of God. First, we must be active disciples. Not passive, active disciples. We must be unshaded light. We must be sure of God's position, that He's more powerful than anything else. And then to be angry without sin, but with purpose. The purpose of it is the kindness of God that leads men to repentance, to speak, to talk, to treat everyone with the kindness of God even when we are rebuking them, right? Even when we are correcting them. I will say that I did not always do that as a father, but I tried. And most of the time I was pretty good at it. Will's not here to say anything different. But I think that I could say that with some certainty. And you know what? That's how we should see people. They're my potential brothers and sisters. So, let me end it with these 4 things if I can remember them. We must be active disciples. Don't call him teacher and not do what he says or listen to what he has to say. We must be active disciples. Secondly, we must be unshaded light. Not letting our anger, not letting our politics, not letting our fanhood, not letting our own personal preferences shade our light. We must be unshaded light. That is being angry and sinning not. That's unshaded light. We must be sure of God's position. And then to be the committed to the task, agents of his kindness. Be angry and sin not. Step in and live and speak in such a way that people's ears might hear, their eyes might see. Our job is not to put men on the defensive to argue their position. Our job is to get them to see the beauty and the glory of God and let it first be seen in me. And by the way, it can't be done by me. Christ alone can do this job of redemption. But Christ has chosen to take up residence within me. Let me understand I'm a jar of clay, and my job is to pour out his glory in how I live and how I work. But I wanted to comfort you today by letting you know, I don't care how much chaos there is in the world, God's power is more, is far outstrips the power of the enemy. If you don't believe me, taste a strawberry that's been cursed for 10,000 years. Be comforted in that. And then